Have you got any advice on how to get a project sponsor to engage more?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I love this question. And I think, you think about sponsors, and you've got to remember that a lot of these individuals are being put onto projects. They've been nominated or voluntold that they're jumping onto this project and being asked to look after it and run it. And it's a significant investment of time and money from the organization as well. And so when we think about sponsors, it's important to remember that not every sponsor is at the same point in their journey. You can actually have sponsors who are just starting out, so it's their first experience of sponsoring a project. You can have individuals that are sponsoring 20 or 30 different projects, which we know is too much. When you're looking at sponsors, they need to be dedicating the time and the effort and the energy to being available for these sorts of things. So, considering how busy that sponsor is and how involved they are is really important as well. And then you also need to sort of test out their interest as well, how interested they are in this piece of work. So there's lots of things to consider to try and get a sponsor engaged and involved. For me, that access of project sponsor and project manager is pivotal. You really want that relationship working particularly well and managing each other and their expectations. And I think like any good relationship that you've got in your life, it's all about trust and clear communication. And so sometimes we forget that when we step into a project context or a business setting, we forget some of those fundamentals. But for me, getting a sponsor committed and engaged starts with stepping into the realm of treating them as a person, trying to understand where they're at on their sponsorship journey, but also being really clear about your expectations of them as a sponsor and also their expectations of you as a project manager. A lot of times that conversation doesn't take place, and there's a lot of these unspoken things that go on, which cause problems and gaps in projects. So being really clear up front, set up a meeting with your project sponsor, sit down, spend half an hour, talk about the expectations of each other. If you've got a position description for a project sponsor in your organization, then talk through that. Use that as a grounding or as a basis to sort of go through and what you'll be expecting that individual to be involved with. If you don't have one, create one. It's always a really good landing pad to start with into that space as well. And then I think, once you're in that conversation with the individual, think about what type of person are they? Are they a CFO? Are they really interested in the numbers and the bottom line that comes with that? Getting a gauge on that type of person. Are they a CIO, for example, or working a senior position within the tech side of things? Are they going to be data-driven? Are they going to be numbers and data-driven? So working out how does your sponsor like to receive information and get information is really critical as well. Just because you're used to communicating in one particular way, it doesn't mean that necessarily that's how your sponsor wants to receive that information. So getting a gauge upon how they work, where they're at in their journey, and what they like to receive information through, whether it's status reports or one-to-one conversations, is really critical right at the start of your setup. I think once you've gone through that process of being clear around the relationship, what you need from each other, the type of information that they like to receive, then it's being really clear about the cadence of how often you'd like to meet. So setting up one-to-ones really early on in the project is key. Get those locked in. If they've got an EA that you need to talk to, work with that person to block in a time that's going to work with them going forward on a regular cadence. Try and find a spot that you're not going to be constantly bumped. So after a board meeting or after a senior ELT meeting, for example, as they tend to always overrun, find a spot when your sponsor is going to be in a good space that you can actually have the conversations around your project and how it works going forward as well. So once you've established that, you've got a good platform to work from, and then you've got a good basis to sort of work with going forward for your project sponsors as well. And that's probably how I'd set it up going forward to get a sponsor engaged and involved.
I think that's wonderful. There's just so much value in everything that you just said then. So much to unpack that if people watching this aren't taking notes, they're going to have to go back and watch it again and start taking some serious notes, because there was a hell of a lot of value there. There was one part that you mentioned where I can imagine a lot of trepidation with especially new project managers, keeping in mind that this is one of the things that a project manager has to learn about their role, is that they sometimes think that they're quite low in the business, but they're dealing with people way up at the top. And sometimes they can be dealing with people in the C-suite, sometimes they can be dealing with the CEO. To go to them and set expectations could be quite daunting. I imagine having a sponsor specification, as you described, just would be helpful. But is there any tips that you can offer on how somebody, maybe a very first-time project manager, should approach what may seem like an intimidating conversation with a very, very senior person about what you expect from them?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think it's easy to sort of say that when you're experienced in the space, and that's kind of, you've been doing these things for years. But I think
It doesn't get easier.
Starting out, yeah, sure, these conversations can be quite challenging. And I guess, I'd always be encouraging to say, this individual's entrusting you to run this piece of work. They're making you responsible for its delivery. And you need to have an open and honest relationship with that person. And that means being a little bit brave, and putting yourself out there a little bit and saying, hey, look, if this project really is to work well, and we are to be a success together in the delivery of this piece, this is honestly what I need from you. And I encourage people just to step up a little bit. I know it's tricky and I know it can be quite daunting, but if you form that relationship very early on, where you are being seen to being really clear, really transparent with your expectations and what you will deliver for them as well, I think that puts you on a really good platform. If you take on the subservient nature right from the get-go, that sort of establishes your relationship straight away. But if you come forward with being clear and articulate and transparent about what you're going to be doing, that really sets a very different tone for your sponsor project manager relationship going forward.
Thank you, Guy. That was Guy Thorpe. I met Guy because he puts a huge amount of really valuable content onto LinkedIn, freely available to anybody. So have a look in the description and follow the link to his profile and get connected as soon as you can. You won't regret that. That solves the problem about the sponsor, but what to do about the rest of those stakeholders? I asked Andy Kaufman about what to do if your stakeholders hate you or your project. And believe me, at some point in your career, that's going to be useful information. So you might as well go and watch it now.